Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kauschi. Now, today on Future Affairs, we shift the focus to boardroom gender diversity and the profit equation. The Madani government is committed to increasing Malaysian women's labour force participation to 60% from the current 56%, which is low by both regional and international standards, especially when compared to men's 81% odd LFPR. It's timely that we look at yet another dimension of positive impact from women, boardroom gender diversity, and the profit equation. Now, FYI, according to the United Nations International Labour Organization, or ILO, gender equality in the boardroom makes companies 20% more likely to improve their performance. Meanwhile, Securities Commission, or SC, Malaysia's target to have 30% of women on the board of large public listed companies, as stated in the Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance, was actually achieved in June this year. However, for all PLCs in Malaysia to have 30% women on board will require 351 more women. Pauline Ho, partner PWC Malaysia and PWC APAC Human Capital Leader and Steering Committee member with 30% Club Malaysia, joins me now in the studios to discuss strategies for increasing boardroom gender diversity and the profit equation behind it. Hello, Pauline. Thank you so much for making time for us. How are you this morning?
I'm good. Thanks for having me here, Tamina.
Wonderful. So, Pauline, let's get the conversation started by speaking about 30% Club Malaysia's board mentoring has just achieved something momentous. You welcome the biggest number of mentees for your newest cohort. So tell us a little bit more about this entire program and how it's been going.
Yeah, so the board mentoring scheme is what we call it. It's a collaboration between PWC Malaysia and 30% Club. We launched this in 2017 with 10 mentees, right? So for the eighth cohort, where we celebrated on the 13th of September, we had 20 who completed the scheme, and our largest cohort, 29, for the 9th cohort. Of course, throughout the years, since 2017 to date, we have 106 mentees who have completed, and 97 very, very experienced mentors who have volunteered repeatedly to help our mentees. So the board mentoring scheme is really a cross-sector board level mentoring for experienced board members to provide guidance and share experience, help them expand their network for building relationship purposes, and understand what it takes to be a board member. So all these board-ready women are matched to experienced board members in a series of meetings over a 9-month period.
Right. So it does sound extremely interesting, especially the way in which 30% Club, Pauline, has been able to build capacity all the way from the first cohort that you say was only 10 mentees. But now let's focus on the ethos behind 30% Club itself. Why 30%? And why is that a sort of a magic number when we look towards capacity building, be it in political or even in corporate arenas?
Well, we have heard about 30% being a tipping point. Right. The intent is not really to say that 30% is the goal, right? When 30% Club started, it is a business campaign in the UK, and then Malaysia chapter was announced in 2015 by the then Prime Minister, right? So the intention was for businesses to understand the importance of diversity. It extends beyond the boardroom really, but you know the focus at that point in time for 30% Club is to be the first. For Malaysia to be the first country in ASEAN to achieve 30%. And as you're aware, as of 1st June, we have achieved 30.6% women representation for the top 100 companies on Bursa. So, you know, it was a significant achievement.
Absolutely, but such a significant achievement. And when it comes to that magic number of women in the boardroom, I think perhaps if you could draw from some of your own personal experience or even those of your cohort and those from your circles, what difference does it really make on a very practical day-to-day aspect when there are actually at least 30% women in boardrooms during strategic junctures such as, of course, the AGMs and etc.?
Yeah, so if you look at, there's a lot of studies out there, right, to prove that,
Sure.
you know, when you have a diverse board, including gender diversity being one of the key features, you will have a lot more constructive arguments. Not to say that there aren't any among men, you know, amongst a group of men, but
sure.
You know, it's just having a different kind of perspective really helps in better decision making. So there are enough studies out there to show that there is a correlation between better company performance in terms of share price, in terms of PE multiples, right, in terms of return on equity. A study done by ICDM of 312 PLCs, if I remember correctly, between 2017 and 2019 shows that boards or companies with 1/3 female representation actually perform significantly better than those without, right? So, if you're an investor, you probably think about, yeah, this is important, right, for us to get better value from a company. So, it just goes to show that it is important.
And it can also, of course, then meet those gender goals and targets that we are increasingly adopting even globally. Pauline, share with me a little bit more about 30% Club's overall new focus and theme when it comes to gender.
Yeah, so you must have heard about the new tagline, Path to Parity, and that's what you're referring to, yeah? So, when, just like your question earlier, why 30%? We talk about the tipping point. But at the end of the day, if you think about the world, we are about 50-50 in terms of population.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
And if that is the case, then why is it not the same across everything? Right, so that's why we are looking at parity, and it extends beyond gender now. The focus is really looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right, so whilst we still talk a lot about gender diversity, it's really about everything else that is diverse in terms of intergenerational workforce that we have. Right, so boards should not be only of a certain age. Right, there are different perspectives that a younger generation board member may be able to bring, and that is your target customer for a lot of companies as well. Right, we also talk about people with disabilities or differently abled people. Right, so there is also the social inclusion aspects if you think about that.
Correct. And from there, I'd like to zone in on an issue that, of course, you're also very passionate about, together with PWC as well as 30% Club, which is the fact that, yes, we are slowly but surely really achieving those targets when it comes to the top 100 PLCs. We'll talk a little bit more about the other PLCs later, but first let's speak about women in senior management and leadership roles, Pauline. What are some of the gaps that have been noticed that are quite pronounced, as well as the reasons behind it? Looking at women in the workforce, you've got a couple of the usual suspects, right? Motherhood penalty, the 7% or so gender wage gap. How do these play out when it comes to opportunities for promotion and leadership just to get over there? Yeah.
So as you rightly pointed out, a lot of times the caregiving responsibility rests on women, not only in terms of motherhood, also in terms of aging parents, or just caregiving in general. So if we want to address this, it really goes back down to whether, setting the right tone from the top, whether you have a strategy that includes looking at fair policies that applies to both gender to enable caregiving, for instance, to be, carried out by both genders. So that's why I'm a strong proponent of parental leave as opposed to extending maternity leave. If you think about extending maternity leave, yes, whilst it's important for women to be born,
to meet those international standards as well, which in some countries go up to 9 months to even 3 to 4 years, right?
Yeah, but I wouldn't say we should go there. We should focus on parental leave, because if you continue to extend maternity and not think about paternity, then it is really re-emphasizing that women should be doing the main caregiving for kids, right, for children. And policies like what we have in PWC Malaysia, Flexcare, where you're able to take time off to take care of, family members who are ill, or, and it applies to both gender. So then it's not restrictive that, it must be the women that takes time off to, take care of the elderly or the sick.
That's very interesting. And Flexcare-wise, Pauline, what kind of trends has PwC been able to observe when it comes to the demographic that is actually opting in for Flexcare? Is it still primarily women, or are we also seeing some numbers from men?
We actually don't track that because we treat it as any other caregiving responsibilities.
Right, interesting.
Yeah, but what we do notice is that now, from demographic perspective, 60% of our manager level and below are women. 40% directors and partners are women. So I guess some of these policies must be working out well, otherwise we won't have that.
Yeah.
Right? And we have our first female chairperson Nurul Ain as well.
Yeah,
From
exactly.
July,
So we've
yeah.
definitely heard about that, and that is great news because once again, being a market leader, that helps to reflect positively that sort of a sentiment across the structures, right? So hopefully we'll see fairly more female chairpersons as well when it comes to other PLCs as well as internationals. Pauline, now let's move along to the factor and back to PLCs in Malaysia.
Yep.
So when it comes to those that are not doing all that well, for especially the gender narrative, there do in fact happen to be 19 PLCs that still have all male boards. Now, how can gender diversity encourage better governance management? Let's focus on that first.
Okay. From a governance management point, I mean, I would prefer that you hear it from experts, right? So people who have done enough survey on this. So there was this link between governance and trust that can be observed, and the Edelman Trust Barometer study, specifically for institutional investors in 2020, actually found that 63% of investors in the US says if you disclose employee diversity, the company is more trustworthy. Right. So that is one aspect of it. And from a strategic decision-making perspective, studies have actually shown that when you have a diverse board, there is less comfort. I did talk about like potential for groupthink just now.
Correct.
Right? When you have a diverse group of people together, chances are it's less comfortable. And when it's less comfortable, actually, creates a lot more debate and discussions, which leads to better decisions and better outcomes. And ultimately, it is about financial performance. If we are in a business segment after all.
True.
Right. So for companies who have not had diverse boards yet, really should consider the ICDM study, as I mentioned, where the percentage I have here now, 38%, higher median return in equity return on equity as compared to boards without diverse.
That's significant, 28%,
Yes.
right?
38.
Oh, sorry, 38.
38,
Okay,
yes.
38. So that's even more significant, Pauline. Now let's go into perhaps, of course, we do not have someone from any of those 19 PLCs here with us right now, but to ponder a little bit upon the factors that may cause also a dearth of available candidates who are women to step up into both senior leadership as well as management roles. So PWC, as you'd mentioned, for example, has Flexcare as one of your options. Now, there are other matters that are related to unpaid care work, such as access to childcare. Are there any achievements that have been made, any movement in this sector which has helped employees, in your experience, to manage the work-life balance better, both for women as well as for men?
Yeah, I think you pointed out childcare as an important perspective, and I think in the past the government has also provided some incentives for companies to create childcare, but it's not so straightforward for a lot of companies to do so. To have a childcare facility within the organization itself. It's really about providing options for childcare rather than just a facility. I mean, that's one perspective of it. On to your earlier question about companies, why are they unable to find women board members, for example, or why do they have less female in the pipeline?
Correct.
For senior management? It could well be that they haven't really considered people who don't put up their hands. Why do I say that? There has been enough studies, I'm sure you've read about as well, where if there is an opportunity for advancement,
sure,
if you ask a female, they will go down the checklist and say, oh, I probably don't meet all of them and I shouldn't volunteer myself for the role. The reverse for men, right? As long as they feel that they're quite confident, they'll be able to learn on the job. They would be able to. They will put out their hand for the particular role. So if that is the case, is there any mentoring program like what we do in 30% Club, or any kind of coaching and development that focuses on helping these women who has significant potential to overcome some of these barriers that could be individually created. It's not really a competence issue. It's just a confidence issue, perhaps.
And perhaps also the wider picture is that this is how we are sociologically raised, as the gender difference between boys and girls, which also begins in school, and there can be many other factors leading to it, right?
Yes, I still remember getting very excited when I saw a particular Bina ayat by my kids when they were young.
Sure.
Right? And I always share this story. I came back and they were doing Bina ayat, so I was having a look at what they were writing, and it's like, always ibu sedang mencuci pinggan di dapur.
Oh yes,
You know?
that's so familiar,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yes.
I'm getting flashbacks of my school days.
Yeah, and you know, bapa baru balik dari kerja or something along
True,
those
true.
lines. Yeah. So if we don't change the textbooks, then how are we going to build the next generation who believe that, you know, both genders can be whoever they want to be?
And everything that we see replicated in daily life, all the way to what we see in advertising, mass media, as well as even in the news media, right?
Yes.
It further emboldens stereotypes. Okay, so moving along from stereotypes as well as the gender gap, let's talk about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Now, this is, of course, one of the latest buzz phrases that has been taking, of course, the corporate world by storm. Particularly, we feel and we've observed these changes once the pandemic, work from home orders had set in, and now, of course, we're in a complete economic recovery stage. Most places have actually gone back to either completely working from the office or even a hybrid sort of a workforce. So tell me about why DEI, Pauline, is also a really important factor when we look at boardroom gender representation.
I think it is an important factor from an employee attraction standpoint as well. I've explained earlier about you know, how companies are deemed more trustworthy if they provide statistics around diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you think about our workforce nowadays, they are a lot better read, you know, or more exposed to current affairs as compared to the past, right? And being that, and if we want to progress as an organization, you really need to get the top talents that's available in the market, and it is a war for talent. I mean, as you mentioned, post-pandemic, you know, one of the biggest issue companies face, other than the economic challenges, is really whether they have enough people to
Correct.
deliver their strategies and, you know, achieve their goals. So if you're not an attractive employer, where a lot of employees now are looking at how do they align their values to that of the company, whether they are doing meaningful work, whether they are actually overall well-being, which talks about, you know, the mental well-being, besides the work-life balance perspective of working too many hours, right? It's part of the equation. So a company that has, you know, very progressive policies or strategies with regards to DEI is seen as an organization that they would be more aligned to, right? And therefore, you'll be able to attract better talents.
That would actually be quite natural and quite instinctive, right?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about PwC's experiences in ensuring DEI, both in Malaysia, but also within your role as you've observed across the Asia-Pacific region.
So the PWC approach starts from the global, as a network.
Okay.
Right? We are a global affiliation or network of firms. So as part of the network, there is a global strategy, right, on I&D, where we believe that this is, we need to basically embed in our language is I&D, inclusion and diversity, rather
Right.
we call it DEI, right? So we need to embed I&D within our DNA and culture, right, in order for us to achieve our strategy as a network. So in doing so, you know, it's not like the network saying you must have this as a strategy. It's just a 2+ approach where gender must be the one, and then you have 2 additional local considerations
Right.
for each of the country. Right, so that's how it is, from a strategy perspective, is spread to all the territories. And then at each territory, the 2+ approach becomes part of leadership KPIs.
I see. That's
Yeah.
so interesting. Would you be able to share what those 2 additional KPIs are or strategy areas when it comes to the Malaysian market?
Yeah, so we have gender, we have social inclusion, and we have people with disabilities.
Right.
Right, and we set medium and long-term targets because it's not something that can be achieved overnight.
Sure.
Yeah, so, and that is not only pertaining to Malaysia, I mean, other territories have their own areas as well. So specifically for Malaysia, we have put that as part of our leadership KPIs. And then, of course, we have to ensure that we track, and to be accountable, we also publish this data in our annual report. Right, and for other territories, you know, for example, Japan, people with disabilities is a very big focus for them. In addition to gender, they are not doing as well as Malaysia at the moment, right? But they are working towards that. So for PWDs, they have been, you know, really focusing on how to find the right jobs and to enable them to flourish and develop as well. Right, having different career pathways as well.
Very true. And I just had a quick insight that I would love to glean from you. Speaking about, of course, the future of work and DEI, and of course, social inclusion and disability inclusion as well. Where do you see, big picture, perhaps in a decade's time, all of this playing out, also when it comes to increasing mechanization, particularly in the corporate sector, whereby we are actually removing employees that are at the lower level and focusing more on technical skills? Do you see that as being an opportunity to perhaps revamp and still have more individuals with disabilities on board, as well as meeting the gender components in the near future?
Yeah, I think actually it does help, right? You know, a lot of administrative related work is what will be mechanized, right? If we start thinking about, you know, in the past there has been, or it continues to have, a lot of studies talking about, you know, human being replaced by robots or by programs, right? And then there is a whole push about upskilling. I believe that, you know, as human beings, all of us can learn, unlearn, and relearn. And it is about, you know, finding what is our strengths and to be able to then, you know, leverage that and not have to do things that a lot of people do not want to do anyway to start with.
Also true, the grunt work, the monotonous work, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so, for example, we had an experience with, you know, a differently able person who is, has an autism spectrum. So, you know, instead of doing just detailed data work, he's able to spot trends, you know, identify anomalies, and it was very effective as compared to, you know, for our other team members who has less affinity or, you know, competency in this area and prefer to engage people more, right? So everyone, I think, has different skills to bring to an organization, and I believe that with the automation that you mentioned, it will really help us zoom in on the human side of, you know, of us all, and be able to then leverage that even better.
Thank you. I think it's very valuable that you're able to share from a management perspective as well how disability does not necessarily have to be a disadvantage during employment. Focusing a little while again on the attracting and retaining talent part, particularly when it comes to what we actually noticed across the pandemic's retrenchments. Women of all sectors, particularly those working in professional capacities, were often unable to cope with the tripling of burdens when it came to unpaid care work, and many actually were either retrenched or they left their jobs. Now, what opportunity arises now for all of those women and even more to be encouraged to come into the workforce by closing that upskilling gap, since women especially, have possibly lost about more than a year or so of professional access?
Yeah. So I'm not sure whether you've heard, Talent Corp actually had this career comeback.
That's right.
Website, yeah. And I think we need to continue to emphasize on that, right? We have hired women who have been out of work for a couple of years because of different priorities and commitments at that point in time, and help them come back to the workforce as well, right? So I think there is a need for some readjustment, because unless a person has been, you know, actively keeping themselves very relevant and well trained during the period of not at work, right? There is a period of adjustment, and employers need to understand that actually the individual coming back to work has a whole lot of experience before they start work, and it doesn't go away, right? The ability to then tap into the experience of the past with just a little bit of upskilling is so valuable, right? So a very short gestation period is the investment time that's required, but I feel that the benefits thereafter is significant. So should look at a medium-term view as opposed to whether a person can just hit the ground running.
Exactly. And I'm going back to the bottom line before we conclude, Pauline. Let's speak about ESG investing, which of course is one of the fastest growing trends in the investment community over the last few years. So what does the data show about women in boardrooms also being linked to more ethical business practices and of course ultimately having a much higher ESG score when it comes to all these PLCs and companies? We're talking about those 800 odd companies that don't quite meet those measures of 30% women on boards yet.
Yeah. So there is no survey in Malaysia specifically on this point.
Yeah, that we understand.
Yeah, but in the US, the annual corporate director survey in 2022 actually shows that female directors do value diversity a lot more. Right, across all dimensions, whether it's gender, race or ethnicity, age, tenure, right? So there is a marked difference between what is deemed as important to female directors versus the male directors. And female directors also prioritize climate change, right? Even if in the short term, there is some impact to bottom line, right? I guess there is always a debate about that, right? But if companies start thinking about climate change, addressing climate change as an opportunity as opposed to only a risk, right?
Or only something which you have to allocate budget towards, right?
That's right. So I think that really helps a company make decisions that are, help the company on the longer term from a sustainability perspective. There is also a connection between ESG to strategy that the women seems to agree more that ESG issues are linked to company strategy and it is a priority. And also the final one is that female directors are more likely to say company actions can improve trust. That's 81% of female versus 66% of.
Wow, trust. So when it comes to investments, when it comes to anything to do with finances, literally, particularly for those who would be in the actual economic sectors, I think nothing can trump that.
That's right. So that's why I thought it's an important point to highlight.
Fantastic.
It's the last point to remind you.
All right, wonderful. Pauline, it's been so great having you in the studios with us. Any last words before we conclude with regards to the importance of not just actively promoting more gender diversity in the boardroom, but why ultimately this ought to be something which organizations naturally move towards, not because they're trying to hit some target?
Yeah. I think it has gone beyond whether it's the right thing to do. I think it's a business issue that companies need to really think about. If you think about your customer profile, your workforce, right? What is it that we are looking at? We are trying to, to be responsible business that will be sustainable over the long period of time. If that's the case, then looking at the demographics, it just sort of makes sense that your company reflects what you see in terms of your workforce and your customers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this, Pauline. It's been wonderful having you on the show. So that, of course, was Pauline Ho with PWC Malaysia. This has been Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kausti. We'll see you next Friday with more business analysis and insights. Here's to a productive week ahead.